The rain had begun as a whisper against the empty streets, soft at first, like the voice of a memory, but soon it grew wild, lashing against the cracked windows of a lonely gas station at the edge of town. The air smelled of oil, gasoline, and rusting metal. Each gust of wind carried the cold straight through the bones of anyone brave enough to still be outside. An elderly woman stepped off a half-empty bus that hissed and sputtered before pulling away into the darkness. Her name was Marjorie Ellis, though few people in town remembered it anymore. To most, she was simply the church lady, the one who spent her days sorting through piles of donated clothes that others no longer wanted. Her hands, bent and thin from years of work, held a worn-out purse close to her chest. Inside was a single $10 bill, wrinkled and soft from being folded too many times. It was all she had left until her next pension check, still 5 long days away. She pulled her threadbare coat tighter around her shoulders, the hem brushing against puddles that reflected the yellow glow of a flickering streetlight. Each step splashed faintly, her shoes soaked through, but she barely noticed. Her thoughts were fixed on one small thing, the loaf of bread she planned to buy for supper. It was a simple meal, but one she looked forward to. She had learned long ago to make peace with little things. As she neared the gas station, a sound cut through the rain, a harsh metallic clang, followed by the low rumble of an engine trying to start. Marjorie lifted her head and squinted through the blur of water. Beside the farthest pump stood a man in a black leather jacket, his face shadowed beneath a wet hood. The side of his motorcycle gleamed under the neon light, but his body looked wrong, hunched, unsteady. He staggered, grabbed the handlebar and nearly fell. Marjorie froze. Instinct told her to walk away. He was big, muscular, the kind of man she had been taught to avoid. The emblem on his jacket read Iron Shadows, a biker group with a reputation that made most townsfolk lock their doors. But what she saw wasn't danger. It was pain. The man's knuckles were bloodied. His lips split. Another biker stood a few feet away, pacing nervously and muttering, "We're out of gas. Cards are gone, man. Stolen. We can't make it another mile." Their voices carried desperation more than menace. Marjorie hesitated under the awning. The cold bit into her, and her heart wrestled between fear and compassion. She had nothing, yet something inside her whispered that she could still give. Her mother's words echoed in her mind, old and tender, "You do not measure kindness by what you keep, but by what you give when you have nothing left." So she stepped forward. Her shoes sloshed through puddles until she reached the man slumped beside the bike. He looked up, startled, his blue eyes glazed from exhaustion. Marjorie laid a trembling hand on his arm. His skin was like ice. "You need help," she said softly. He tried to protest, but his voice cracked. "I'm fine, ma'am." "No, you're not." Without another word, she reached into her purse and pulled out that last $10 bill. Her fingers brushed the faded ink one last time before pressing it into his hand. "Use this," she said. "Get something to eat. Warm up." He stared at her as though she had handed him gold. Marjorie walked toward the store, her heart pounding. She could feel the eyes of the bikers on her back, unsure, disbelieving. Inside, she bought a sandwich, a bottle of water, and a small pack of bandages. The cashier, a teenage boy scrolling on his phone, barely looked up. To him, she was just another old woman buying something trivial on a stormy night. When she returned, the man, whose name she would later learn was Colton, sat on the curb, rain sliding down his bruised cheek. His bike leaned against the pump, dented and streaked with mud. Marjorie knelt beside him, ignoring the puddle seeping into her skirt. "Here," she said, unscrewing the bottle cap and handing him the water. He drank slowly, his throat trembling with each swallow. She tore the sandwich in half, pressing one piece into his hand. Then she opened the bandages and dabbed at the blood on his cheek. "Why are you doing this?" he finally asked. Marjorie smiled faintly. "Because sometimes, even the strongest people need someone to remind them they're not alone." For a long moment, neither spoke. The rain softened, falling like a curtain of silver around them. In that small patch of light beneath the flickering sign, 2 strangers sat, one who had nothing left to give, and one who had forgotten what mercy felt like. When she finished tending to his wounds, she stood, her knees aching. "You'll be all right," she whispered. Colton wanted to say thank you, to ask her name, but before he could, she turned and walked away into the night, her coat fluttering behind her like a faded flag of grace. That night, Marjorie arrived home to a dark, silent apartment. The single bulb in her kitchen had burned out days ago, and she hadn't bothered replacing it. She set down her purse, now empty, and took off her damp shoes. Her stomach growled softly, reminding her what she had given up. She lit a small candle on the windowsill and watched the flame dance against the glass. Outside, the rain continued to fall. She could still see his eyes, tired, scared, human. She whispered a short prayer into the dim room. Lord, keep him safe. Then she sat quietly, the rhythm of the rain her only company, her heart heavy but peaceful. She had no way of knowing that somewhere across town, Colton was staring at that same rain, thinking about the fragile woman who had saved his spirit that night. Morning arrived slowly, like a sigh after a long cry. The storm had passed, leaving behind streets glazed with rainwater and a fragile golden light stretching across the rooftops. For the first time in weeks, the sun peeked through the clouds. The world looked freshly washed, though still heavy with the weight of last night's memories. Inside a small second-floor apartment at the corner of Maple and 3rd, Marjorie Ellis stirred awake. Her hands reached instinctively for her blanket, still thin from years of wear. The faint chill of dawn clung to her room. Her cupboard stood half open, revealing empty jars and an old tin of tea leaves. She moved slowly, her joints stiff, but there was something peaceful about the quiet. Marjorie wasn't thinking about what she didn't have, she was thinking about that man, the biker from the gas station. She had prayed for him again before she fell asleep, whispering his name into the darkness, though she wasn't even sure if she'd remembered it right. Colton, she murmured again just to keep his memory alive. She poured herself a cup of weak tea, the last spoonful from her tin, and sat by the window. The glass was still smudged with the fingerprints of years gone by, but beyond it, the morning light looked soft and forgiving. And then she heard it. At first it was just a faint tremor in the distance, a low rolling thunder that didn't belong to the sky. It grew louder, deeper, heavier. The walls began to hum with the sound. Marjorie frowned, setting her cup down. She thought perhaps it was construction or a passing truck, but as she drew the curtain aside, her breath caught in her throat. There, filling the narrow street below, were motorcycles. Dozens of them. The engines rumbled like a living storm, echoing off the brick buildings until it felt like the whole block was shaking. Chrome gleamed in the sunlight. Leather jackets glistened with rainwater. Helmets reflected flashes of morning gold. And right at the front, standing tall beside a black and silver bike, was the man from last night. Colton. He looked completely different. His jacket was clean, his hair combed back, his face still marked by faint bruises but calm, proud, and unmistakably grateful. Behind him, at least 50 other riders lined up in rows, their jackets bearing the same insignia, iron shadows. Neighbors began to peek from behind curtains. Children pressed their faces against windows. Some stepped out of their doors, confused, curious. No one could remember the last time this quiet street had seen anything like it. Marjorie's heart pounded. She clutched her sweater tightly around her chest and opened her door, her knees trembling as she made her way down the old wooden stairs. The rumble of engines grew louder with every step. When she pushed open the front door, the world outside seemed to still. The bikers turned toward her almost in unison. Colton took a step forward, removing his helmet. His voice carried easily, deep and calm. "Miss Marjorie," he said, smiling. "You might not remember me. But we remember you." In his hands was a bouquet of white daisies. He walked up to her slowly, like a soldier approaching a saint, and offered them to her. The petals were still damp from the morning dew. Behind him, the rest of the riders dismounted their bikes and stood silently, a line of weathered faces, men and women with tattoos, scars, and steel chains, all united in that single moment of respect. Marjorie blinked rapidly, unsure if she was dreaming. "What is all this?" she whispered. Colton smiled faintly. "I thank you. For what you did last night." "I just helped," she said softly. "That's all." He shook his head. "No, ma'am. You did more than that. You gave your last dollar to a stranger. You didn't ask who we were or what we'd done. You just saw someone hurting and you helped. That kind of kindness, it changes people." The other bikers nodded quietly. One of them, a woman with silver hair tied in a braid, spoke up. "We were stranded that night. Our gas cards were stolen. We had no food, no place to go. Your kindness got us through." Marjorie covered her mouth with her hand. "I didn't know." Colton reached into his jacket and pulled out a small envelope. He held it out to her. "We wanted to give something back." She hesitated, her fingers trembling as she took it. The envelope was thick. She peeled it open slowly and her eyes widened. Inside were hundreds of dollar bills, neatly folded. She stared stunned. $20,000, Colton said quietly. "Bikers from all across the state pitched in after hearing your story. We told everyone about the woman who gave her last $10 to help a stranger." The crowd of onlookers gasped softly. Someone clapped. Another shouted, "God bless you, ma'am." Tears welled in Marjorie's eyes. Her voice shook. I don't deserve this. You do, Colton said firmly. Because real kindness doesn't ask for anything. And that's why it deserves everything. Her hands trembled as she held the envelope to her chest. She could feel her heart beating faster, overwhelmed by a joy she hadn't felt in years. The tears came freely now, streaking her wrinkled cheeks. Colton stepped closer and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. You helped us when the world turned its back. Today we wanted to remind you that the world can still be good. The air was filled with the soft hum of engines and the murmurs of neighbors gathered around, many of them wiping away their own tears. Marjorie looked around her, at the faces of strangers who had suddenly become family, at the sunlight bouncing off chrome and leather, at the daisies trembling in her hand. You've all done more than I ever dreamed, she whispered. Thank you. Colton smiled. We're just returning what you gave us. Hope. And then, as if orchestrated by fate, the bikers began to cheer, not the wild roar of a gang, but the heartfelt applause of a family. One by one they took turns hugging Marjorie, thanking her, shaking her frail hands. The crowd of townspeople joined in. Children clapped. Someone brought out coffee. The whole street came alive with warmth. For the first time in a long time, Marjorie didn't feel invisible. She wasn't the forgotten old woman at the edge of town anymore. She was the heartbeat of a miracle. She looked up at Colton again, still struggling to find her words. You've given me more than I ever thought I'd see again, she said quietly. He grinned. Oh, we're not done yet. Her eyebrows lifted. You're not. Colton turned and gestured to the riders behind him. We've got one more surprise for you. The street was still buzzing when Colton gave the signal. Engines quieted, conversations softened, and the riders began unloading things from the backs of their bikes, wooden crates, sacks of soil, pots filled with flowers, and tools that gleamed in the sunlight. Marjorie looked on, confused. What on earth are you all doing? She asked, wiping her eyes. Colton grinned. You'll see. He motioned toward the small patch of ground beside her building, an abandoned garden that had once been a splash of color in the gray concrete courtyard. Years ago, before her arthritis had worsened, Marjorie had tended it herself. She had planted marigolds and roses there, watered them every morning, and smiled at how they drew butterflies even in the city. But over time, her joints stiffened, her hands failed her, and the garden withered away until it was nothing but dirt and weeds. Colton must have heard about it because he pointed toward the barren soil and said, We figured you could use a little help bringing it back. Marjorie blinked, speechless. Oh my, you can't be serious. Oh, we're serious, said a biker with a thick beard, already digging a shovel into the ground. Another handed out gloves and began pulling weeds. Someone else rolled up a wheelbarrow full of mulch. Within minutes, the courtyard had become a lively work site filled with laughter, music from a portable speaker, and the rich smell of fresh earth. Neighbors who had spent years ignoring each other came out to watch. Some joined in. Children giggled as they carried watering cans bigger than their hands. The sound of engines was replaced by the rhythm of shovels, laughter, and clinking spades. Marjorie stood there, her hands trembling around the bouquet of daisies she still held. It was almost too much to take in, the roar of motorcycles replaced by the harmony of kindness. Her heart swelled with something she hadn't felt in decades, belonging. Colton walked over and handed her a small trowel. Thought you might want to do the honors? She laughed through her tears. I can barely bend these old knees, son. Then we'll bend for you, he said simply. So she sat on a small stool one of the bikers brought and together they worked. She pressed her fragile fingers into the soft soil, feeling its coolness against her skin. It reminded her of her youth, of her husband, of the life she had lived before the loneliness crept in. Each seed she dropped into the dirt felt like a piece of hope returning to her. At one point she looked around, men with tattoos planting flowers, children painting old pots, neighbors smiling and talking again, and she realized how absurdly beautiful it all was. People who might never have spoken to each other were now laughing together because of one simple act of kindness that had rippled through their lives. The air grew warm as noon turned to afternoon. Someone fired up a small grill and offered food to everyone. The smell of grilled corn and coffee mixed with the scent of blooming flowers. The whole courtyard felt alive again. Marjorie sat back, resting for a moment, and watched Colton crouch beside a little girl who was struggling to plant a sunflower. Just a little deeper, he told her, his voice gentle. The girl nodded solemnly, then patted the soil with both hands. Perfect, he said. Marjorie smiled. She couldn't remember the last time she had seen such simple joy on people's faces. Later, as the sun began to tilt westward, the garden had transformed. Rows of bright flowers covered the soil. A small stone border had been laid, and a wooden sign now stood at its edge. The letters were hand-painted in white, "The road gives back." Marjorie traced the words with her fingers, her eyes glistening. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Colton nodded. "So are you, ma'am. This garden, it's your heart just planted in the earth." She tried to laugh but her voice broke. "You boys are going to make an old woman cry again." "Then we're doing it right," someone called from behind, and laughter spread across the courtyard. The bikers spent the rest of the day fixing little things around her building, patching a broken fence, painting a few benches, even cleaning the old fountain that hadn't run in years. By the time the sun began to dip behind the buildings, the place looked like a different world. Marjorie felt like she was dreaming. The joy, the colors, the sound of laughter, it was as if life had remembered her again. As the bikers gathered for one last picture, Colton stepped up beside her holding a small box. "There's one more thing," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "Another surprise?" He opened the box and lifted out a custom leather vest, soft, black and beautifully stitched. On the back was a patch sewn in gold thread that read, "Guardian of the Road." Marjorie gasped, pressing a hand to her heart. Colton placed the vest over her shoulders. "You're one of us now," he said. "An honorary member of the Iron Shadows." The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. The bikers revved their engines in salute, the deep sound echoing through the street like a heartbeat. Marjorie stood there trembling, her frail hands gripping the edges of the vest. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. Colton smiled. "You already said it last night when you helped me. You didn't need words then and you don't need them now." The evening light glowed golden against the garden, casting long shadows that stretched across the flowers. Marjorie looked around at all the faces, people young and old, tough and tender, different in every way but united by something invisible yet powerful. She finally understood what she had always believed but never truly seen, that kindness, when given freely, always finds its way home. As the afternoon melted into gold, the engines began to quiet one by one, their thunder fading into a gentle hum that vibrated through the heart rather than the ears. The once forgotten courtyard now glowed with warmth, a patchwork of flowers, laughter, and sunlight. The scent of fresh soil mingled with the faint aroma of roasted corn and coffee still lingering in the air. Marjorie stood at the center of it all, her hands clutching the vest against her chest. The words "Guardian of the Road" shimmered faintly in the dying light. She had never owned anything so beautiful, not in decades. Colton approached her again, his helmet tucked under his arm. The shadows of the setting sun stretched long across the pavement, wrapping them both in amber light. "We have to get going soon," he said softly. "But we wanted to see that smile of yours one more time before we ride out." She looked at him, eyes brimming with tears. "You've done more than enough. I don't even know how to thank you." He shook his head. "You already have. You reminded us what real strength looks like. You didn't just give money, Marjorie, you gave faith. You made a bunch of rough riders remember that the world still has goodness in it." Marjorie smiled faintly. "And you reminded me that miracles aren't gone. They just ride on two wheels sometimes." Colton chuckled, then turned toward the crowd of bikers waiting behind him. "Brothers, sisters, gather up." Engines revved in unison, the deep growl filling the street. Children covered their ears but grinned anyway. One by one, the riders mounted their bikes, forming a perfect line down the road. Colton stood last, glancing back at her with a look that said everything words could not. He extended his gloved hand. Marjorie reached out, their fingers brushing briefly, a silent exchange of gratitude and grace. "Wherever the road takes us," he said, "you're with us." And then, with a signal, 50 engines roared to life. The street shook. The wind kicked up dust and petals from the garden. The neighbors watched as the line of motorcycles rolled forward, sunlight catching on their chrome like a river of fire. As they turned the corner, the sound faded into the horizon, a song of thunder and thanks. When silence finally returned, Marjorie stood still for a long time. The courtyard was calm now, the last rays of sun glinting off the flowers. She could still feel the echo of the engines in her chest, steady and rhythmic, like a second heartbeat. Inside her apartment, she placed the envelope of money on the table beside the daisies and the leather vest. The evening light caught on the petals, turning them gold. She sat by the window where she had prayed the night before, and for the first time in years, her reflection in the glass looked alive, not lonely, not forgotten, but part of something vast and good. Her thoughts wandered to all the little things that had led to this moment, the rain, the bus ride, the trembling $10 bill. She realized that every act of kindness, no matter how small, was like a seed. You never know where it will grow or what kind of garden it will become. A knock sounded at the door. It was one of her young neighbors, a shy boy who used to avoid her in the hallway. He held out a cup of tea. "Mom said to bring you this," he murmured. Marjorie's eyes softened. "Thank you, sweetheart." He hesitated before asking, "Are those men coming back?" She smiled. "Maybe not soon. But the kindness they left behind, that will stay right here." The boy grinned and ran back down the hall. Marjorie took a sip of the tea and gazed out the window again. The courtyard glowed under the lamplight, and for the first time she wasn't just watching life, she was part of it. Later that night, she knelt by her bed and whispered a quiet prayer. "Thank you for showing me that even when the world grows cold, kindness still burns bright. Thank you for reminding me that giving never leaves us empty." As she lay down, the sound of the engines replayed in her mind, steady, powerful, full of life. She smiled, her heart full. In the following days, the story of the old woman and the bikers spread far beyond their small town. People shared it online, telling others about the grandmother who gave her last $10 and ended up changing 50 lives and her own. Donations arrived from strangers who said her story reminded them to be better, to give more, to love without fear. The garden flourished. The flowers grew taller and brighter than anyone expected, drawing butterflies and laughter back to the courtyard every morning. Children began calling it Grandma's Garden. And on its small wooden sign, beneath the painted words "The road gives back," someone had added a line in tiny letters. "Kindness always finds its way home." Marjorie never took the vest off the hook by her door. Each morning she touched it gently, a reminder that she wasn't forgotten, that kindness travels farther than any road could ever stretch. Sometimes, when the wind was just right, she swore she could still hear the distant rumble of engines echoing through the hills, not a storm this time but a promise. And every time she heard it she smiled. Because she knew that somewhere out there 50 riders carried her story and her heart with them.